So what makes a killing in a movie memorable, or satisfying, or emotive? Now obviously there are going to be some spoilers, so I'll say the name of the movie first, and then the name of the character that's killed, so you can skip that bit if you want. I don't know, close your eyes and hum. We're exposed to a lot of death in film, and of course not everyone who dies deserves it, or is expected to die. I really remember those on-screen deaths that surprised me. Let's take a look at The Bad Lieutenant, a film about a corrupt police officer who eventually seeks forgiveness and right at the end of the movie is killed.
I'll never part from you. Hey, cop!
Who shot him? He was a corrupt cop. It could have been anyone. If you look at the scene again, you'll see that the crowd doesn't really react. It's because the set was open. No one knew what was going on. The gunshot was dubbed and people kind of just looked and thought, is that Harvey Keitel? Now I guess, watching the movie, we could assume that the lieutenant is going to die at the end. That doesn't seem to be a surprise. The surprise really is the complete lack of dramatic build-up. It leaves us with an even greater shock. There's no tense music, there's no shootout. We're just left thinking, what happened? Oh my god, he's dead. Similar to this is the end of gangster classic White Heat. James Cagney's character, Cody Jarrett, is pursued by police, and we as an audience know he's not going to get away. But after being hit, he does this. Oh dear, he blew himself up. Over the top, defiant, insane. It's a great movie death. Or the worst best man speech ever. Also, check out the very final words of White Heat.
Cody Jarrett. He finally got to the top of the world. It blew right up in his face.
What does that mean? I mean, he blew the gas tanks up. He knew what he was doing. There's no irony there. It's not as if he locked himself in a safe, or he drowned because his coat was full of stolen gold. Anyway, in the original Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi is killed by Darth Vader. I'm sure that's not a spoiler for anyone. It's like going up to somebody reading the Bible and saying, oh, Christ dies at page 305. And when you look at the narrative, it's kind of inevitable that Obi-Wan's going to die. He's Luke's master, and Luke can't develop fully with him around. In films where there's a master and student, this is pretty typical. Or, also in Star Wars, the student fights the master. Still, this is a very memorable death, not just because Star Wars is hugely popular, but because of the way it happens. Obi-Wan just decides to die. Obi-Wan chooses to become more powerful than you can possibly imagine, which, if you ask me, was a bit of a gamble. What about One Night at McCool's, where Paul Reese's character escapes a shootout, only for this to happen?
Thank you, God!
It's actually been a very long time since I've seen that movie, and it's one of the only things I remember about it, apart from Michael Douglas saying DVD.
On a quiet night watching a good movie on my DVD.
No, don't get me wrong, I seem to remember it's pretty good, but DVD.
If you're gonna have a first-rate home entertainment center, you gotta have a DVD.
There are lots of these out-of-the-blue deaths or killings. The Grifters is another example. And when a death, or a method of death, is a genuine surprise, it stays with you. Although maybe it doesn't stay with you as much as the really brutal killings. Stop eating that lasagna. It's Day of the Dead. The Day of the Dead, where Captain Rhodes is torn apart by some very naughty zombies. Ooh, that was nasty. What about Total Recall? Now it's not who you might have thought I was going to say, Cohagen, whose eyes pop out of his head, but Richter, played by Michael Ironside.
See you at the party, Richter!
These work because they're brutal and gruesome and very over the top and tongue-in-cheek. I mean, a man can't be pulled apart like that. There'd be a lot more ripping. It would take a lot longer. And if you ever sever somebody's arms off with an elevator and then throw those arms after their body as they fall to their death, you're a psychopath. There are a lot of these types of deaths which are nasty or gross, but it's hard to really stand out with so many Saw films and Saw imitators. The wood chipper scene from Fargo comes to mind. It almost feels like a death can't just be grisly, it has to be over the top, or ridiculous, or have something really memorable like the wood chipper. But on-screen deaths can be brutal without being gruesome or bloody at all. Take a look at Kubrick's early film, Paths of Glory, based on a true story and banned in France for 17 years because of it. Paths of Glory is about 3 French soldiers in the First World War who are selected for execution because of their battalion's failure in an attack. Despite a rousing defense by Colonel Dax, played by Kirk Douglas, the execution goes ahead.
Attention, boys, hands. Ready? Aim. Fire!
It's emotive in its display of cruelty. In fact, I think it's probably one of the most emotive films I've ever seen. And it was Kirk Douglas's favourite that starred himself. Another example of this is Ralph Fiennes' Coriolanus, in which he plays Coriolanus, a Roman exile who, at the head of his old enemies, punishes Rome for betraying him. But, poised to march on Rome, Coriolanus backs down.
Cut me to pieces, Volskis! Men and lads! Stain all your edges on me! Boy!
Let him die for it.
This is memorable for the exact opposite reason why over-the-top deaths are memorable. This is real. He never stood a chance, but he fought anyway, and it's so much more vicious for it. Of course, if we're talking about sad, I guess we should really talk about Bambi. The scene in which Bambi's mother dies is famous.
We made it! We made it, Mother! Mother!
Just got something in my eye. The end of the Green Mile is similar. It pulls on our heartstrings. There's nothing quite as memorable as a tragedy, although the end of the Green Mile isn't quite as unexpected.
Well, on to.
But for every sad film death, we have a righteous one too. Quite possibly a righteous one that follows a sad one. The revenge. A great example of this is Once Upon a Time in the West, a film where Charles Bronson's character's brother was killed by a young Frank, played by Peter Fonda. Lessons be learned. Don't kill Charles Bronson's brother in a movie, because he seemingly spends the next 30 years becoming a remorseless marksman, all with the objective of hunting Frank down. It's very satisfying. It's righteous. The crescendoing music, the mise en scène. It makes you feel for the kid who had to hold his brother up on his shoulders. It makes you hate Frank. It makes you want to see him get blown away, and it makes you happy when he is. Another good example of this is Pulp Fiction, in which Butch, Bruce Willis's character, escapes an imminent raping. By the way, this video isn't for kids. I think I should say. Sorry about the Superman thumbnail. After Butch and Marcellus Wallace, played by Ving Rhames, stumble into a shop fighting, they're taken prisoner, and, well, it's weird.
Which one of you want to do first?
Butch escapes after hitting the Gimp, but even though Wallace wants Butch dead, Butch doesn't leave him there. There are many things that make this clip emotive. The content, someone is being raped, and by a cop, but also the music and the pace. Butch doesn't need to go back for Marcellus, but he does, and he finishes a guy we can't possibly have sympathy for. In The Terminator, we see a ruthless machine from the future crushed after a long, remorseless chase. In The Revenant, Leonardo DiCaprio's character is motivated by killing the man who killed his son. To us, these last four examples are presented as just. We're on the side of the killer because the antagonists have been built up so much in our minds as being deserving of death. I mean, who's going to watch Pulp Fiction and say, well, I think Butch should have just gone to the police? Of course, there is the opposite, the horrific mistake, the mistake which should have been a righteous death. The example I'll give you is also memorable for its brutality. Irreversible features a man beating another man to death because he thinks this guy raped someone he knows, but he's got the wrong guy. No fire extinguishers were harmed in the making of that clip. Now, the slaying I'm going to leave you with is probably my favourite, and is from one of my favourite films. Kurosawa's Ran is an adaptation of King Lear and the legends of Mori Motonari. It's about Hidetori Ichimonji, who decides to split his kingdom between his three sons. But they start fighting between each other, and the kingdom eats itself from within. Keide, first married to the eldest son, marries the second son after the first's death, and orchestrates the fall of the house of Ichimonji. The second son's general, Kurogane, knows what's happening, and after finding that Keide has had the second son's first wife murdered, takes matters into his own hands. Now, if you haven't seen the film, her death might not seem as compelling. She is the cause of almost the entire Civil War, and her death is pretty unexpected. This isn't the end of the film, but it's close. I like the pacing. The running up the stairs builds freneticism, and the confrontation is glorious in how real it is. Kurogane shouts at Keide. She explains herself. Then he kills her. There's nothing else. There's no, well, now you die. There's no showdown. There's no ceremony. He just beheads her. And he doesn't care what the king thinks about it either. It's righteous, it's brutal, but what makes it so memorable is that it's so matter-of-fact. It's what makes Kurogane such an interesting character. This momentous act and then on to the next thing. Well, those are the components, I think, of a memorable screen death. Obviously, there are loads of very memorable screen deaths. What's your favourite? Thank you for joining me. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. And if you have subscribed, please keep watching. Thanks again, and I'll leave you with this clip.
わしもお前たちも生きておるのに三郎三郎三郎死んではならん